Shang Chi.
Shang.
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 S-H-A-N-G. Shang.
That's what I said.
Welcome back to Film Infection. Hope you're having a great day. And Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings just came out in theaters a few days ago, and I thought it was pretty good. I actually think it's one of the better MCU movies. I definitely put it up there in like my top 5 or 6. I thought it did a really good job at setting up this character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, in this video, I'm just going to be going over my thoughts on the movie, letting you know what I liked, didn't like, what was good, what was bad, all that kind of stuff. So let's get into it. And right off the bat, the thing that I love most about this movie is that it just breaks the MCU origin story template. Okay, we have been fed the same origin story over and over again, just with a different character. Okay, and it has gotten a little boring. It's gotten a little stale. Okay, I liked it in Iron Man, right? I thought they did a really good job the first time. When they did it with Captain America, it was pretty good too. But then they started doing it with a bunch of other characters, and then they did it over and over and over again. And it got boring eventually, okay? It got predictable, and it got a little annoying, quite frankly. And I really like that this movie just breaks that mold and shows that there are other ways to tell origin stories in the MCU. And I think that's the main reason that I really enjoyed this movie, okay? Is because it was unpredictable, right? It wasn't like, oh, okay, here's the part where the mentor dies, and then he gets all inspired, and then he goes out and fights a bad guy. There wasn't that part where I'm like, okay, I know this is gonna happen, you know, I know what's gonna happen next, some variation of what happened in the first Iron Man movie, right? But this movie surprised me. I was like, oh, okay, they're going in that direction with it, right? And I really loved just how new it was. That's the main thing. It's something new, right? I love seeing new things. I love seeing movie studios not just rebooting the same movie over and over, not just making a bunch of sequels to the same movie. I love that they're exploring new templates to tell origin stories with in the MCU, and I think it's really cool that this movie is sort of kicking that off. Now, while I do love that they broke the template, I do think they're going to need to refine it over time, because I thought there were a lot of pacing issues with this movie. Okay, I thought that the pacing in some points was pretty janky, especially with the flashback scenes for his origin story. And there's one scene in this movie that I think really shows how they could have dealt with the pacing a little better. They decided to show the flashback of his mother dying towards the middle of the movie rather than at the beginning, because I guess they were trying to show us his character and then show us what drives his character, which is definitely backwards from the normal MCU template, and I really like that, but I don't think they should have done it in this movie because it's very awkward, and it definitely isn't helped by the fact that the scene itself is pretty stupid, but I'll come back to that. So while it does reach for new heights, while it does break the MCU mold, it does still have some of your Marvel tropes that you get in all the movies, and I think that's what holds it back from being like the best MCU movie. Because honestly, I really love the lore and the fantasy of this movie, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe sort of always has this like feel to it and these requirements that don't give directors very much freedom, and I think that's what holds this movie back from being just amazing. So it was good, but it does have some of your normal MCU tropes like forced humor, right? That's very prevalent here. The forced humor in this movie is sometimes unbearable, okay? Sometimes it completely ruins the flow of a scene, and it ruins the flow of many scenes. And a great example of this is during like the flashback origin story scene where Shang is like explaining his origin story to Awkwafina, and then it stops in the middle for a joke about like what the flight attendant is offering her for dinner. So it was funny, right? I laughed when it was happening, but at the end of the scene I was like, that joke like completely ruined the scene. And that happens a lot throughout the movie, okay? It's not like it just happened once and it's like, okay, it doesn't really affect the quality of the movie in any way. I think this is what brings the movie down from being amazing. This movie has some of the worst comic relief ever, especially from Awkwafina. And it's not that the jokes are bad or anything. In fact, I found myself laughing out loud at a lot of these jokes, and it's not like Awkwafina is a bad comedian. She's hilarious. It's just these jokes are placed at the worst points possible, and I think it really pulls the movie down. Another MCU trope in this movie is the big CGI final battle, okay? And now it's not bad in any way. I think it's really cool, but it feels very MCU. Okay, and it feels exactly like what it's exactly what you would expect. Okay, at the end of this movie, you'd expect a big CGI final battle with a sky beam, and that's what you get. There's a big CGI final battle, and there's an almost sky beam, okay? It doesn't go all the way to the sky, but there is a beam that comes out of the dragon's back, and it goes to the sky, but it doesn't go all the way to the sky, so I guess it's not as predictable as your typical MCU movie because there's no sky beam, but it's close. Okay, so that's kind of annoying. And with all the fight scenes, there's a lot of CGI that feels a little unnecessary, and I'm gonna touch on that later because I think that's something really important to talk about. But now I want to talk about something I really liked, which was the genre blending in this movie. Okay, I love how they did classic MCU story meets fantasy meets martial arts movie. Okay, that was what really made me just fall in love with this movie. And even more than that, it delivers on all three of these genres. That's what really impressed me. They did a great job at just meshing them together. I love how the fantasy aspect of this movie just gets really weird, especially at the end. That just, it entertains me when they go to different places that you don't expect. Okay, and I love how they did that with the fantasy in this movie. Also, I really love the Jackie Chan style fights that they did with the martial arts side of this movie, right? They were obviously paying homage to Jackie Chan, and it was really cool. I really enjoyed that, and I thought it was very respectful, but it was also really cool because it's like Jackie Chan on just a mega budget. Okay, now, I do think there are a few problems with that. I'll get to that later, like I said, but I really love how they mix the martial arts and this fantasy concept with your MCU budget and polishes on top. That's what made me love this movie. Now, while I like the genre blending, I do think the story was at times a little confusing and convoluted. I liked it, but I found myself confused a few times throughout the movie. And it could just be because I'm not very smart, or it could be because the movie is a little confusing and there are definitely some plot holes in here that should have been addressed at some point in the movie. Now, speaking of stupid things in the plot, I want to get back to what I was saying about his origin story flashback. Okay, in this movie they decide to show the death of Shang's mom towards the middle of the movie rather than at the beginning, because I guess they wanted to show his character and then show what drives his character, which is backwards from the normal MCU template, which I like, but I don't think it worked very well. It felt a little awkward, and that definitely isn't helped by the fact that the scene itself is just horrible. Okay, and it makes no sense. The mother gives up her powers so that she can become a mother and raise a family, right? And I thought that was really sweet. I like how that plays into the story later. But the way she dies is a bunch of armed guys come up to her house and she attempts to fight them. Even though she gave up her powers, why would you fight them if you don't have powers? You're just a normal person. Why would you go up and try to fight these armed men? And I'm pretty sure some of them had superpowers. I don't know, but they were obviously much more powerful than you. If I were her, I would have just ran and grabbed my kid and just ran away, right? And I'm assuming that Shang's dad had some sort of weapon in the house, right, for her to use. But no, she tries to fight them and then dies. Why is the main character's motivation based off of an event that could have been very easily avoided? That was one thing that really upset me. But luckily, it didn't ruin the movie. Okay, now let's go back to what I was talking about earlier about the CGI in these martial art fight scenes, okay? There was a ton of actual practical stunt work being done on this movie, okay? And when you watch the behind the scenes featurette, it's actually really cool. There's a lot of professionally trained martial artists who know these martial arts inside and out and are like really good at them. So for relatively simple action scenes like a fight scene on a bus, Marvel thinks, oh, we have to shove as much money as we possibly can into this fight, right? Because we have like $1 trillion to make this movie. So how can we spend as much money on every scene possible? And they do that, so they intercut these scenes of practical stunt work with the bus getting torn in half and then flipping over and then going through a building and all this crazy stuff that you know didn't actually happen, right? Or people flipping over the side of the bus and then getting knocked into the building and then running alongside the bus, right? All that stuff that obviously can't happen in real life or would be too dangerous to actually film practically, that was obviously just done with CGI, and it takes you out of the moment and it takes you out of the suspense of the scene because you're like, oh, well that's CGI. It actually looks like those guys are fighting inside the bus. It's realistic and it's very suspenseful, and it's very grounded, but then they cut to something outside the bus and it's like, oh, well that didn't actually happen, and it takes you out of it. And I think Marvel trying to shove as much money into the scene as possible and turning all of their scenes up to 11 even when they don't need to sort of ruins some of the action scenes in this movie. And the last thing I want to talk about for this movie is something positive. It's actually the best thing about this movie, and it's the villain, okay? Marvel villains are notorious for just sucking, okay? Their whole thing is they're evil, right? That's how pretty much every single Marvel villain has been, except for Thanos. But then he turned into just being evil. In Infinity War, he was like, I want to bring balance. And it was like, okay, I guess his actions are justified in this sick, twisted way. But then in Endgame, he just turns into this killer who wants to kill everybody. Okay, so they even ruined their best villain, in my opinion. But this, in my opinion, is the most interesting villain because he has a relationship to the hero, right? But he has these conflicting moral values. He's not just a bad person. He's actually trying to be a better father. He's just been manipulated by evil, right? And temptation and stuff. Anyways, folks, that's all I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe if you haven't already, and share it. Why not? Share it, please. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day, and I will see you next time.